The stars burned cold and distant, their light barely piercing the thick atmosphere of the alien world. She stood at the edge of the observation deck, her iridescent skin shimmering faintly under the pale glow of the twin moons. To her kind, intimacy was a transaction, a biological necessity stripped of passion or pleasure. It was a duty, a means to an end, procreation, survival, the continuation of their species. Emotions were secondary if they were acknowledged at all. But that was before he arrived. Before the human. She still remembered the day his ship crashed on the outskirts of her city. The wreckage had been smoldering, the air thick with the acrid scent of burning metal. Her people had been cautious, wary of the strange creature who emerged from the wreck. He was unlike anything they had ever seen, fragile yet resilient, vulnerable yet unyielding. His skin was pale, his eyes a deep, unsettling brown that seemed to hold galaxies within them. And when he spoke, his voice carried a warmth that sent shivers down her spine. He called himself a traveler, a wanderer of the stars. But to her he was something far more profound. He was a revelation. At first their interactions were formal, distant. She was tasked with studying him, learning about his species, his culture, his purpose. But as the days turned into weeks, something shifted. He spoke of Earth, of its oceans and mountains, its cities and skies. He spoke of love, not as a duty but as a force that could move worlds. He spoke of intimacy not as a means to an end, but as a connection, a shared moment of vulnerability and trust. His words were like fire, igniting something deep within her that she had never known existed. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. One night, under the glow of the twin moons, he asked her a question that would change everything. "What does it mean to feel?" he had asked, his voice soft but insistent. She had no answer. Her people had words for duty, for obligation, for survival. But feeling? That was a concept as alien to her as he was to this world. And yet, as she looked into his eyes, she felt something stir within her. A longing, a curiosity, a hunger she couldn't name. It was as if he had unlocked a door she didn't even know was closed. But not everyone saw him as she did. To many of her kind, he was a threat, a disruption to their carefully ordered way of life. His ideas were dangerous, his presence unsettling. And as whispers of dissent began to spread, she found herself torn between her duty to her people and the strange, intoxicating pull she felt toward him. The tension grew, a silent storm brewing beneath the surface. And then, one fateful night, everything came to a head. She stood before the council, their cold, unyielding gazes fixed on her. They had discovered her secret, the moments she had spent with him, the questions she had asked, the feelings she had begun to explore. They called it betrayal. She called it awakening. But as the weight of their judgment bore down on her, she realized that this was only the beginning. The human had ignited something within her, something she could no longer ignore. And as she turned to face him, her heart pounding in her chest, she knew that their story was far from over. But what would happen next? Would she defy her people and embrace this new, terrifying world of emotions and connection? Or would she succumb to the weight of tradition and duty, leaving the human, and everything he represented, behind? The answer hung in the air, unresolved as the twin moons cast their pale light over a world on the brink of change. And somewhere, in the silence between heartbeats, a question lingered: what does it truly mean to feel alive? The council chamber was silent, save for the faint hum of the energy field that encircled the room, a barrier meant to keep dissent contained. She stood at the center, her iridescent skin dulled under the harsh artificial light. The council members loomed above her, their elongated figures casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward her like accusing fingers. Their faces were unreadable, their expressions as cold and unchanging as the stars outside. She had always respected them, feared them even. But now, for the first time, she felt something else: anger. It burned in her chest, hot and unfamiliar, like a flame she didn't know how to control. "You have strayed from the path," one of the council members intoned, their voice echoing in the vast chamber. "You have allowed this creature to corrupt your mind, to fill it with dangerous ideas. Do you deny it?" She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. How could she explain something she barely understood herself? The human had not corrupted her. He had awakened her. He had shown her a world beyond duty and survival, a world where emotions were not weaknesses but strengths. But how could she make them see that? How could she make them understand? "I do not deny that I have spent time with him," she said at last, her voice trembling but firm. "But I do not believe he is a threat. He is different, yes. But different does not mean dangerous." The council members exchanged glances, their silence more unnerving than any words they could have spoken. Finally, the eldest among them leaned forward, their eyes narrowing. Different, they repeated, the word dripping with disdain. You speak of difference as if it is a virtue. But difference is what brings chaos. Difference is what destroys order. And order is what keeps us alive. She wanted to argue, to scream that they were wrong, that there was more to life than order and survival. But she knew it would be pointless. The council's minds were made up, their beliefs as unyielding as the metal walls of the chamber. And yet, as she stood there, her fists clenched at her sides, she couldn't help but think of him, the human. His laughter, his stories, the way his eyes lit up when he spoke of Earth. He had shown her a glimpse of something beautiful, something she couldn't let go of. Not now. Not ever. The human sat in his quarters, staring at the blank wall in front of him. The room was small and sparse, a far cry from the vibrant world outside. But it was safe, at least for now. He had heard the whispers, seen the way the others looked at him, like he was a disease, something to be contained. He had tried to explain, to show them that he meant no harm. But how could he make them understand when they couldn't even comprehend the concept of love? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. He had always been a wanderer, a seeker of new worlds and new experiences. But this place was different. The people here were so closed off, so afraid of anything that deviated from their rigid way of life. And yet there was her. She was different. She had listened to him, really listened in a way no one else had. And in her eyes, he had seen something he hadn't seen in a long time, hope. But now, as he sat there alone, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She had been gone for hours, longer than usual. He had tried to reach out to her through the communication device they had given him, but there had been no response. His stomach churned with unease. What if they had found out about their conversations? What if they had done something to her? He stood abruptly, pacing the small room. He had to do something, but what? He was a stranger here, an outsider with no power, no influence. And yet, the thought of her in danger, of her suffering because of him, was unbearable. He had to find a way to help her, even if it meant risking everything. Meanwhile, in the depths of the city, a group of dissenters gathered in secret. They were few in number, but their resolve was strong. Like her, they had begun to question the council's teachings, to wonder if there was more to life than what they had been told. And the humans' arrival had only fueled their curiosity. They had heard the stories, the rumors of a world where emotions were celebrated, where intimacy was more than just a means to an end. It was a dangerous idea, one that could get them exiled, or worse. But for the first time they were willing to take that risk. "We can't let them silence him," one of them whispered, their voice barely audible over the hum of the ventilation system. "He's the key to something greater. We can feel it." The others nodded, their eyes gleaming with a mixture of fear and determination. They knew what they were proposing was treason. But they also knew that the status quo was no longer enough. They wanted more. They wanted to feel. Back in the council chamber, the tension was palpable. The council had dismissed her, but not before issuing a warning. "You will cease all contact with the human," they had said. "If you do not, there will be consequences." She had nodded, her heart heavy with dread. But as she walked through the empty corridors, her mind raced. She couldn't just abandon him. He had shown her a side of herself she didn't even know existed. He had made her feel alive in a way she never had before. And now, the thought of losing that, of going back to the way things were, was unbearable. But what could she do? The council was watching her every move and she had no allies, no one to turn to. Or so she thought. As she turned a corner, she nearly collided with one of the dissenters. Their eyes met, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Then the dissenter leaned in close, their voice barely a whisper. "We know what you're feeling," they said. "And you're not alone." Her heart leapt, but she forced herself to stay calm. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. The dissenter glanced around nervously before answering. "There are others. Others who want to know more about the human, about his world. We've been meeting in secret. If you're willing to take the risk, we could use your help." She hesitated, her mind racing. This was dangerous, more dangerous than anything she had ever done. But as she thought of the human, of the way he had looked at her, the way he had made her feel, she knew she had no choice. She couldn't go back. Not now. "I'm in," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. The dissenter nodded, a flicker of relief crossing their face. "Good. Meet us tonight in the old sector. And be careful. The council is watching." As they disappeared into the shadows, she felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. The point of no return. But as terrifying as it was, she couldn't help but feel a spark of hope. For the first time in her life, she was taking control of her own destiny. And no matter what happened, she knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. The human sat on the edge of his cot, staring at the door. He had heard the faint sound of footsteps outside, but they had quickly faded. Was it her? Or was it someone else, someone sent by the council to keep an eye on him? He didn't know. All he knew was that he couldn't stay here, waiting for something to happen. He had to act. But as he stood, the door slid open and his heart leapt into his throat. It was her. She looked different, pale, shaken but determined. And in her eyes, he saw something that made his chest tighten. "We don't have much time," she said, her voice urgent. "The council knows. They're coming for you." His stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "They think you're a threat," she said, stepping closer. "They think you're trying to disrupt our way of life. And if they find you here, I don't know what they'll do." He swallowed hard, his mind racing. "What do we do?" She hesitated, then reached out and took his hand. Her touch was warm, electric, and for a moment, everything else faded away. "There's a group," she said softly. "Others who want to know more about you, about your world. They're willing to help. But it's dangerous. If we're caught." He squeezed her hand, his heart pounding. "I'll take the risk. I can't just sit here and do nothing." She nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "Then follow me. And whatever happens, don't let go." As they slipped out into the corridor, the air thick with tension, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of exhilaration. This was it. The moment everything changed. But as they moved through the shadows, the sound of distant footsteps echoing behind them, he knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. And whatever lay ahead, it would test them in ways they couldn't even imagine. The corridors of the old sector were dark, the air thick with the scent of decay and disuse. Flickering lights cast jagged shadows on the walls, and the faint hum of machinery echoed like a distant heartbeat. She led the way, her movements swift and silent, but he could feel the tension radiating from her. Every step felt like a gamble, every corner a potential trap. The weight of what they were doing pressed down on him, but he forced himself to keep moving. There was no turning back now. "This way," she whispered, pulling him into a narrow alcove. Her hand was still in his, her grip tight, as if she feared letting go would mean losing him forever. He could feel her pulse racing, matching his own. For a moment, they stood there, their breaths shallow, listening for any sign of pursuit. The silence was deafening, but it was a fragile kind of quiet, one that could shatter at any moment. "How much farther?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Not far," she replied, her eyes scanning the darkness. "But we have to be careful. The council has eyes everywhere." He nodded, though he couldn't shake the feeling that they were already too late. The council knew. They had to. And if they caught him, if they caught her. He pushed the thought away, focusing instead on the warmth of her hand in his. She was his lifeline, his only connection to this strange alien world. And he was hers in a way he still didn't fully understand. They moved again, slipping through the shadows like ghosts. The old sector was a maze of abandoned halls and forgotten rooms, a relic of a time before the council's rule. It was the perfect place to hide, but it was also a place where danger lurked around every corner. As they rounded another bend, she suddenly froze, her body stiffening. "What is it?" he whispered, his heart pounding. She didn't answer, her eyes fixed on something ahead. He followed her gaze and felt his blood run cold. There, at the end of the corridor, stood a figure. Tall, imposing, their face obscured by the shadows. For a moment, no one moved. Then the figure stepped forward, the light revealing a face he didn't recognize but instinctively feared. "You shouldn't be here," the figure said, their voice cold and unyielding. She stepped in front of him, her body shielding his. "We're not doing anything wrong," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. The figure tilted their head, studying her with a gaze that felt like it could pierce through flesh and bone. "You've been spending too much time with the outsider," they said. "It's clouded your judgment." "My judgment is clear," she shot back, her voice rising. And if you think you can stop us, you're wrong. The figure's expression didn't change, but something in their eyes shifted. A flicker of something dark, something dangerous. We'll see about that, they said before turning and disappearing into the shadows. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she exhaled sharply, her shoulders sagging with relief. That was too close, she muttered, her voice trembling. Who was that? He asked, his mind racing. One of the council's enforcers, she said, her eyes still on the spot where the figure had stood. They're not like the others. They don't just enforce the rules, they make sure no one steps out of line. Ever. He swallowed hard, the weight of their situation settling over him like a heavy blanket. What do we do now? She turned to him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. We keep going. We don't have a choice. They moved again, faster this time, their footsteps echoing in the empty halls. The encounter had shaken them both, but it had also solidified something. A resolve, a determination to see this through no matter the cost. He could feel it in the way she held his hand, in the way she moved with purpose, her fear pushed to the back of her mind. And he felt it too, a fire burning in his chest, driving him forward. Finally they reached their destination, a hidden door barely visible in the dim light. She pressed her hand against the wall, and after a moment, the door slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, the room was small and dimly lit, but it was filled with people. Dozens of them, their faces a mix of fear and hope. They turned as she entered, their eyes widening when they saw him. You made it, one of them said, stepping forward. They were younger than the others, their eyes bright with curiosity. We weren't sure if you would. We didn't have a choice, she said, her voice firm. The council knows. They're coming for him. For all of us. The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over them like a storm cloud. He could see the fear in their eyes, but also something else, a spark of defiance, a refusal to back down. It was the same spark he had seen in her, the same spark that had brought them here. What's the plan? Someone asked, their voice breaking the silence. She took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the room. We fight, she said, her voice steady. Not with weapons but with the truth. We show the others what he's shown us, that there's more to life than duty and survival. That we can feel, that we can love. And if they try to stop us, we make sure they can't. The room erupted into murmurs, the tension palpable. He could feel the fear, the uncertainty, but also the hope. It was a fragile thing, but it was there, burning bright in the darkness. And as he looked at her, at the way she stood tall despite the fear in her eyes, he knew they had a chance. A small one maybe, but a chance nonetheless. But as the murmurs died down and the room fell silent once more, a new sound reached his ears, a faint rhythmic pounding like footsteps. His heart leapt into his throat as he turned to her, his eyes wide with panic. They're here, he whispered, his voice barely audible. She nodded, her face pale but determined. Then it's time. The door burst open and the room erupted into chaos. The enforcers poured in, their faces cold and unyielding, their movements precise and calculated. He felt her hands slip from his as they were separated, the crowd surging around them like a tidal wave. He tried to reach her, to call out her name, but the noise was deafening, the chaos overwhelming. And then, amidst the chaos, he saw her. She was fighting, not with weapons but with words, her voice cutting through the noise like a knife. You don't have to do this, she shouted, her eyes blazing. You don't have to live in fear. We can be more than this. For a moment it seemed like her words. When the world came back into focus, he was on the ground, his head throbbing and his vision blurred. The room was eerily silent now, the chaos replaced by a heavy, suffocating stillness. He blinked, trying to clear his vision, and saw her, standing in the center of the room, surrounded by enforcers. Her hands were bound, her face bruised, but her eyes still burned with defiance. She caught his gaze, and for a moment, everything else faded away. There was so much he wanted to say, so much he needed to tell her, but the words caught in his throat. The enforcers dragged her forward, their grip unyielding, and the crowd parted like a sea, their faces a mix of fear and guilt. No one moved to help her. No one dared. He tried to stand, to go to her, but a sharp pain shot through his side, forcing him back down. He could only watch as they took her away, her eyes never leaving his until she disappeared through the door. The room remained silent, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on everyone. He could feel the fear in the air, thick and suffocating, but beneath it was something else, shame. They had let this happen. They had stood by and done nothing. And now she was gone. But as he sat there, his mind racing, a voice broke the silence. It was soft at first, barely audible, but it grew louder, more insistent. "This isn't over," someone said, their voice trembling but determined. "We can't let them win." He turned, his eyes searching for the source of the voice, and saw the young dissenter who had spoken earlier. Their face was pale, their hands shaking, but their eyes were filled with a fire that mirrored hers. "She was right," they continued, their voice growing stronger. "We can't keep living like this. We have to fight back." The room stirred, murmurs of agreement rippling through the crowd. He could see the fear in their eyes, but also the spark of hope that she had ignited. It was fragile, but it was there and it was growing. "What do we do?" someone asked, their voice barely above a whisper. The young dissenter hesitated, their eyes flickering to him. "We need him," they said, their voice firm. "He's the key. He's the one who showed all of us, that there's more to life than this. If we're going to fight, we need him." All eyes turned to him, and he felt the weight of their expectations pressing down on him. He wanted to help, to do something, anything, but he was just one person. A stranger in a strange world. How could he possibly make a difference? But as he looked around the room at the faces filled with fear and hope, he realized he didn't have a choice. He had started this, unintentionally or not, and he couldn't walk away now. Not when she had risked everything for him. Not when they were willing to do the same. "Okay," he said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "But we need a plan. We can't just charge in blindly. We need to be smart about this." The room erupted into murmurs, ideas and suggestions flying back and forth. He listened, his mind racing as he tried to piece together a plan. It was risky, maybe even suicidal, but it was their only chance. And as the pieces began to fall into place, he felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. This was it. The moment everything would change. But just as they were finalizing the details, the door burst open again and the room fell silent. This time it wasn't enforcers who entered, it was someone else. Someone unexpected. She stood in the doorway, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. But it wasn't her. It was someone who looked almost exactly like her, but different. Younger, perhaps, or maybe just different. The room froze, everyone staring at the newcomer in shock. "Who?" he started, but the young dissenter cut him off. "It's her sister," they whispered, their voice filled with awe and disbelief. "I thought she was gone. I thought they—" The sister stepped forward, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on him. "You're the human," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "The one who changed everything." He nodded, his mind racing. What was happening? Why was she here? And what did it mean for them? "I don't have much time," she said, her voice urgent. "They're planning something. Something big. And if we don't stop them, it's not just her they'll take. It's all of us." The room erupted into chaos again, the fear and uncertainty reaching a fever pitch. He tried to make sense of what she was saying, but his mind was spinning. This changed everything. The stakes were higher than he had realized and time was running out. "What do we do?" someone asked, their voice filled with desperation. He took a deep breath, his eyes meeting hers. "We stick to the plan," he said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "But we move faster. And we don't stop. No matter what." The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over them like a storm cloud. They knew what they were up against. They knew the risks. But they also knew they didn't have a choice. This was their chance, their only chance, to change everything. And as they prepared to move, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The real fight was still ahead, and it would test them in ways they couldn't even imagine. But as he looked around the room at the faces filled with fear and determination, he knew one thing for certain: they were ready. Or at least they would have to be. The air was electric with tension as they moved through the shadows, their footsteps silent but purposeful. The plan was set, but every second felt like an eternity, every breath a gamble. He stayed close to her sister, whose presence had shifted everything. She was a mystery, a wild card, but there was something about her, something familiar yet unsettling. She moved with the same determination as her sister, but there was a flicker of something else in her eyes. Fear? Guilt? He couldn't tell, and there was no time to ask. The council's stronghold loomed ahead, a towering structure of cold metal and sharp angles. It was a fortress, a symbol of their unyielding control. But tonight it would become something else, a battleground. The group split into smaller teams, each with a specific task. His team's mission was the most critical: infiltrate the central chamber and free her. The thought of seeing her again, of holding her, gave him strength, but it also filled him with dread. What if they were too late? What if they couldn't save her? They reached the entrance, a heavily guarded gate that seemed impenetrable. But the sister stepped forward, her movements calm and deliberate. She pressed her hand against a hidden panel, and after a tense moment the gate slid open. The guards didn't react. They were already unconscious, thanks to the other teams. He glanced at her, his curiosity burning, but she shook her head. "No time," she whispered. "Keep moving." Inside, the stronghold was a maze of corridors and chambers, each more oppressive than the last. The walls seemed to close in around them, the air thick with the scent of metal and fear. But they pressed on, driven by a shared purpose. Finally, they reached the central chamber, a vast room filled with monitors and control panels. And there, in the center, was her. She was bound to a chair, her head bowed, her body limp. His heart shattered at the sight, but he forced himself to stay focused. They had to be quick. They had to be smart. The sister moved first, her hands flying over the control panel as she disabled the security systems. He rushed to her side, his hands trembling as he untied the restraints. "I'm here," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm here." Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment she just stared at him as if she couldn't believe he was real. Then she smiled, a small, fragile thing that filled him with hope. "I knew you'd come," she said, her voice weak but filled with warmth. But before he could respond, the room was flooded with light, and the sound of footsteps echoed around them. They turned, their hearts sinking as the enforcers surrounded them, their weapons drawn. The council members followed, their faces cold and unyielding. "You thought you could win?" One of them sneered, their voice dripping with disdain. "You thought you could change anything?" He stepped in front of her, shielding her with his body. "We don't have to fight," he said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "There's another way. A better way." The council members laughed, a harsh, grating sound that sent shivers down his spine. "There is no other way," they said. "This is the way it has always been. And this is the way it will always be." But then, something unexpected happened. The sister stepped forward, her face pale but determined. "You're wrong," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "There is another way. And I can prove it." The room fell silent, everyone staring at her in shock. Even the council members seemed taken aback. "What are you talking about?" one of them demanded. She took a deep breath, her eyes flickering to him and then to her sister. "I was one of you," she said, her voice filled with guilt and regret. "I was an enforcer. I believed in your way. But then I saw what it was doing, to her, to all of us. And I realized I couldn't be a part of it anymore." The room erupted into chaos, the council members shouting, the enforcers hesitating. He could see the doubt in their eyes, the cracks in their resolve. And in that moment he knew they had a chance. "Listen to her," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "She's telling the truth. You don't have to live like this. You don't have to be afraid." For a moment no one moved. Then slowly one of the enforcers lowered their weapon. Then another. And another. The council members stared in disbelief, their power slipping away with every weapon that hit the ground. But just as it seemed like they had won, the sister turned to him, her eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't want it to end like this." Before he could ask what she meant, the room was filled with a blinding light, and the ground shook beneath their feet. The monitors exploded, the control panels sparking and smoking. The stronghold was collapsing. "We have to go," she shouted, grabbing his arm and pulling him toward the exit. He hesitated, his eyes darting to her sister, who was still weak but determined. "We'll carry her," he said, his voice firm. "We're not leaving anyone behind." Together, they lifted her, their movements frantic but coordinated. The stronghold was crumbling around them, the walls cracking, the ceiling collapsing. But they kept moving, driven by a desperate need to survive. Finally, they burst through the exit, the cool night air a relief after the suffocating heat of the stronghold. They didn't stop until they were a safe distance away, their bodies collapsing onto the ground as the stronghold imploded behind them. For a moment, there was only silence, the weight of what had just happened settling over them. Then she turned to him, her eyes filled with tears. "You did it," she whispered, her voice filled with awe and gratitude. "You changed everything." But as he looked at her, at the sister who had risked everything to help them, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The stronghold was gone, but the council's influence wasn't. And as the dust settled and the reality of what they had done sank in, he knew one thing for certain: this was only the beginning. And then, as if to confirm his fears, the sister spoke, her voice trembling but filled with resolve. "There are others," she said. "Others like me who want to change but don't know how. We have to help them. We have to keep fighting." He nodded, his heart heavy but determined. They had won a battle, but the war was far from over. And as he looked at her, at the sister who had become an unexpected ally, he knew they would face whatever came next together. Because in the end it wasn't just about survival. It was about living. And for the first time he felt like they truly could. The dust from the stronghold's collapse settled slowly, like a veil being drawn over the chaos they had just survived. The night air was cool against his skin, a stark contrast to the heat and fear that had consumed them moments ago. He sat on the ground, his body aching, his mind racing. She was beside him, her head resting on his shoulder, her breathing shallow but steady. Her sister stood a few feet away, her arms wrapped around herself, her eyes distant. The others, those who had fought with them, were scattered around, their faces a mix of exhaustion and disbelief. They had done it. They had brought down the stronghold. But as he looked at the ruins, at the smoke rising into the night sky, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. "What now?" someone asked, their voice breaking the silence. It was the young dissenter, their face pale but determined. They had been brave, braver than most, and he felt a surge of gratitude for their courage. He took a deep breath, his mind racing. What now indeed? The stronghold was gone, but the council's influence wasn't. There were still others out there, others who believed in their way of life, others who would fight to keep things the same. And then there were those like the sister, those who wanted to change but didn't know how. They couldn't stop now. They had to keep going. "We rebuild," he said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "We show them there's another way. A better way." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. It wasn't just about tearing down the old, it was about building something new, something better. And as he looked around at the faces of those who had fought with him, he felt a spark of hope. They could do this. Together. The days that followed were a blur of activity. They worked tirelessly, clearing the rubble, tending to the wounded, and reaching out to others who had been too afraid to join them before. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, moments of doubt, moments when it felt like they were fighting a losing battle. But they kept going, driven by a shared purpose, a shared hope. She was by his side through it all, her strength a constant source of inspiration. She had been through so much, but she never wavered. Her sister, too, had become an integral part of their efforts. She had knowledge of the council's inner workings, knowledge that proved invaluable as they worked to dismantle their influence piece by piece. But it wasn't just about the physical work. It was about the emotional work, too. They had to confront their fears, their doubts, their pain. They had to learn to trust each other, to rely on each other. And slowly, tentatively, they began to build something new, a community based not on fear and control, but on trust and connection. One night, as they sat around a fire, the air filled with the sound of laughter and conversation, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. She was beside him, her hand in his, her head resting on his shoulder. Her sister sat across from them, her face relaxed, her eyes filled with a quiet contentment. The others were scattered around, their faces illuminated by the firelight, their voices filled with hope. "Do you think we'll ever be free of them?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with curiosity. He hesitated, his mind racing. The council's influence was still out there, still a threat. But as he looked around at the faces of those who had fought with him, at the community they had built, he felt a surge of hope. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I do know this, we're stronger together. And as long as we have each other, we have a chance." She nodded, her eyes filled with a quiet determination. "Then we'll keep fighting," she said. "Together." As the weeks turned into months, their community grew. More and more people joined them, drawn by the hope of something better, something more. They worked together, building homes, planting crops, creating a life that was about more than just survival. It wasn't perfect, there were still challenges, still moments of doubt, but it was theirs. And for the first time they felt like they were truly living. But even as they built their new life, they never forgot the past. They never forgot the sacrifices that had been made, the lives that had been lost. And they never forgot the sister who had risked everything to help them. She had become a symbol of hope, a reminder that change was possible, even in the darkest of times. One day, as they stood on the edge of their community, looking out at the horizon, she turned to him, her eyes filled with a quiet determination. "Do you think we'll ever see the end of it?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with curiosity. He hesitated, his mind racing. The council's influence was still out there, still a threat. But as he looked around at the faces of those who had fought with him, at the community they had built, he felt a surge of hope. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I do know this, we're stronger together. And as long as we have each other, we have a chance." She nodded, her eyes filled with a quiet determination. Then we'll keep fighting, she said. Together. As the years passed, their community flourished. They built schools, hospitals, places of gathering and celebration. They created a life that was about more than just survival, it was about connection, about love, about hope. And as they looked out at the world they had built, they knew it had all been worth it. But even as they celebrated their victories, they never forgot the past. They never forgot the sacrifices that had been made, the lives that had been lost. And they never forgot the sister who had risked everything to help them. She had become a symbol of hope, a reminder that change was possible, even in the darkest of times. One day, as they stood on the edge of their community, looking out at the horizon, she turned to him, her eyes filled with a quiet determination. "Do you think we'll ever see the end of it?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with curiosity. He hesitated, his mind racing. The council's influence was still out there, still a threat. But as he looked around at the faces of those who had fought with him, at the community they had built, he felt a surge of hope. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I do know this, we're stronger together. And as long as we have each other, we have a chance." She nodded, her eyes filled with a quiet determination. "Then we'll keep fighting," she said. "Together." And so they did. They fought not just for themselves but for each other, for the future they had built, for the hope that one day they would truly be free. And as they stood together, looking out at the world they had created, they knew that no matter what came next, they would face it together. Because in the end it wasn't just about survival. It was about living. And for the first time they felt like they truly were.